81 years ago, during the Second World War, one event changed our nation like no other. The bombing of Darwin was the first attack by a foreign power on Australian soil. And just as the strike on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941 was for the Americans. The raids on Darwin on the 19th of February 1942 was a date which would live in infamy for Australians. Gone was any national naivety that our safety was assured by the tyranny of distance. Instead came the stark realisation of our position within the region, of the perils of proximity. On that day, around 240 Imperial Japanese high-altitude bombers, dive bombers and fighters undertook 2 air raids. The first occurred just before 10 a.m, lasting for almost 30 minutes. The second, close to midday, lasting for about 20 minutes. The intent was to disable Darwin from being used as an Allied base and to demoralise the Australian public. Bombs fell from the sky, buildings were strafed, enemy aircraft attacked the harbour, the wharf, the aerodromes, town and surrounding areas. 8 ships were sunk in the harbour and about 20 damaged. 2 more were sunk in nearby waters. More than 20 aircraft were destroyed, and much of Darwin's civilian and military infrastructure was either mangled or obliterated, including the post telegraph and cable offices, civil hospital, the police station and government offices. Amidst the chaos raining down, military personnel put up what resistance they could. Allied vessels in the harbour strived to defend themselves. Australian personnel manned anti-aircraft guns. American P-40s tried to get airborne, and against the odds and in extremis, their efforts ensured a handful of enemy aircraft were shot down. Justice Lowe would later note in his inquiry report the many acts of heroism of those on the ships, in the harbour, on the land, and by nurses in the hospital. Most tragically, that dreadful day saw more than 250 people killed. Hundreds more were wounded. And among the dead were many Australian Army, Navy and Air Force personnel, as well as civilians. Around 90 Americans lost their lives when the USS destroyer Peary was bombed. Prime Minister Curtin acknowledged that these most grave attacks struck a severe blow. More raids would follow. Between February 1942 and November 1943, Imperial Japanese bombers attacked Darwin 63 more times. 30 further raids targeted strategic sites in Western Australia, the Northern Territory and Queensland. Yet these subsequent attacks were neither as devastating nor as deadly as that first raid on the 19th of February 1942. 81 years ago today, as news spread of bombs raining down on Darwin, our national psyche was jolted by a jarring truth, that Australia was more exposed to an attack than we had imagined. But Prime Minister Curtin reassured Australians that while Darwin had been bombed, it had not been conquered, and he was dead right. From the devastated town in 1942, from the rubble and ruins, a city has risen, a great city. A city today of even greater strategic significance for our nation and for our allies. A city home to some of our country's most important defence infrastructure and assets. And a city which forms a formidable front line of our nation's northern phalanx. On this, the 81st anniversary of the bombing of Darwin, we remember those who died. Their sacrifice is a legacy of lessons for Australians today and tomorrow, of our vulnerability as a nation, regardless of the times, of our need for vigilance, however improbable the threat, and of the enduring value of our northern defences against authoritarianism, whatever its form, lest we forget.